I am always on the lookout for fantastic new deals on Steam, so I came across a action RPG looking kind of game that was $5.84 on sale by the name of Bloody Spell, and for that price and the gameplay that I saw, I decided that I couldn't resist, so I went ahead, I bought the game, I beat it, and I'm now bringing you a review on the game. A couple things to mention real quick before we hop into it is there is going to be some slight spoilers for the game. I'm going to showcase some of the secret areas, and I am going to talk a little bit about the gameplay and maybe show some footage of the final boss. So if that's something you're concerned about, I am going to go ahead and give warnings just before we hop into that footage so you can kind of skip past it or whatnot. Let's go ahead and hop into the review. So, Bloody Spell is an action-packed hack-and-slash style game, kind of very similar to like Ninja Gaiden if you're familiar with that, and it has been turning a couple of heads since its release. Steam says that this game came out all the way back in 2022, however, I was finding some YouTube videos that were as old as 6 years, so perhaps there was like a closed beta or something like that, but anyways, this game came out a couple of years ago. I want to see if it's worth your time, and more importantly, if it's worth your money, so that's going to be the question that we're seeking to answer in today's video to see if it lives up to that potential and the little bit of hype that's surrounding it. It's developed by Elong Games, which does appear to be a Chinese game studio. Now, as for the narrative in this game, you step into the shoes of Yejin. Now, I am definitely going to mispronounce some of these names, so that's just something we'll have to get past. And he is going to be a young martial artist, and he's actually on a mission to rescue his sister from some sort of like a demonic cult, from what I can tell. The narrative is very, very simple and straightforward. It serves as kind of a backdrop to the action rather than being the main attraction, so you're playing this game for the combat and the progression, as opposed to any sort of like a captivating story or anything like that. The world of Bloody Spell is actually a very dark place, drawing inspiration from what seems to be some ancient Chinese mythology, and it does blend it, of course, with some kind of dark fantasy elements as well. The story isn't the greatest strong point, but it does provide a fairly compelling atmosphere, so it definitely keeps you engaged. One downside, though, is there's a lot of incomplete translations for both important gameplay and story elements. We'll dive into this a little bit more later on, but there's definitely some cutscenes in there that felt pretty important to the story that were fully in Chinese, both text and voice acting, so I basically just couldn't tell anything about what was going on, and there's no subtitles for it, nothing like that. It makes it very hard to follow the story sometimes. So with any game, one of the most important aspects is, of course, going to be the actual gameplay itself, and I do think that is where Bloody Spell really shines. So the combat system that's delivered by this game is so satisfying, and it's very responsive. It's almost on par with something the likes of Elden Ring, or some sort of a really combat-centric game like that. There are definitely a couple issues, but it's overall just super fluid, so you can chain together attacks, dodges, there's counters in the game, there's all sorts of passive abilities, there's a fairly decent variety of weapons with at least, I believe, like 6 main weapon classes. Each of them are going to provide a very distinct play style, so it helps to keep the combat fresh. There's different upgrades and different combinations for all of those weapons as well. The upgrades, so even particularly passive ones, they feel impactful and they definitely add depth to your character progression. So there's different automatic dodges that you can get, and there's counters, and there's all sorts of really, really cool abilities. One of the highlights, in my opinion, is the looting system. So instead of needing to button mash or hold a bunch of buttons to pick up items and loot, you can essentially just open up chests and then run away without ever thinking about it again. And the reason for that is because you get this really satisfying loot burst, like something like Diablo, but then the gear, after a certain amount of time, basically just comes to you and gets absorbed, and you don't have to even worry about picking it up. And the same thing goes for quest items, HP, everything that you might need to pick up. The only exception that I could tell being static weapon spawns around the map, as well as certain healing items that you can find. The game definitely encourages you to explore as well. Each of the levels are very small, but the exploration does feel impactful because you're able to find different upgrades that you wouldn't have otherwise. Some secret outfits, for example. There was one that I had to spend way too long trying to kill a bunch of rats to actually get it. So I definitely did that, though, because the outfit looked pretty cool in my opinion. On the flip side, though, it definitely has some flaws. So it's very, very, very easy to get stun locked by enemies. I know in the final boss fight, for example, before I got the rhythm down, I was getting stun unlock where I would eat like 9 to 10 hits back to back just because there isn't anything you can do once you're trapped. You can't dodge, you can't block it, you can't do anything really. It's just kind of sit there, take your hands off the keyboard, and hope they let up soon. Some enemies definitely do feel like hit sponges as well, so they do take an excessive amount of damage or hits before they actually go down, which can definitely serve to slow down the pace of the game. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but sometimes you just wish that you could get past the enemies a little bit quicker. Even with highly upgraded weapons and stuff like that, a lot of the bosses can feel like hit sponges as well too, which was a bit of a shame. Visually speaking, Bloody Spell is okay. It definitely does look pretty decent, especially for an indie game from what seems to be a solo developer. There's definitely a lot of smooth animations in the game, especially when it comes to the character and the combat. And there is some pretty decent character designs too, so there's definitely some unique looking enemies. The art style, again, kind of blends that traditional like Chinese aesthetic and then brings in the dark fantasy elements to it, so it's a very cool combination. There's a lot of minor issues though, such as tooltips or, hints and those sorts of things that only show controller configurations, even if you're playing with mouse and keyboard, and there is no way to change them at present, even inside the settings. It doesn't, detract significantly from the experience of the game, but it definitely would be a small oversight that I would say some people would understandably get annoyed at. I'm definitely one of those people. That's why I'm bringing it up in my review. The sound design inside the game definitely complements the action quite well. There's a lot of very crisp and clean weapon effects and some impactful sounds too when it comes to the combat, so it doesn't feel too floaty or anything like that. The sound effects definitely do a very good job of tying it all together and making it believable. The music is combined predominantly of some traditional elements, or instruments rather, so you're going to hear a lot of like flutes and stuff like that, with a little bit of modern kind of arrangements in there too, which definitely helps to enhance, the atmosphere that you got going on in the world building. The voice acting is voice acting of all time. There's a lot of incomplete translations, so we were kind of talking about this earlier, where a lot of the text, especially in important cutscenes, is still strictly just Chinese, both written and verbal, so there's essentially no way to understand what's going on. And if you don't look at like a synopsis of the story, you're probably not going to understand it. And especially if you don't speak Chinese or Mandarin, you're definitely going to feel a little bit disconnected from the story, I would say, which is a bit disappointing, especially if they're really wanting players to lean into that story. But I think we're mainly just here for the gameplay, so you can kind of get past it, but it definitely is something to consider. Let's talk about performance real quick. Now, let's imagine that you are playing on a toaster strudel, a low-end toaster strudel at that. You are going to be able to run this game. Now, I was playing on the lowest graphic settings possible because I didn't really know what to expect going in. There's no in-depth graphic settings, so it's basically just you pick, hey, do you want low quality, or hey, do you want high quality? That's it. There's no like, turning off motion blur and those sorts of things, and I didn't want to deal with all that crap, so I just went lowest quality. I had no problems running it. The game was a solid 60 the whole way through. Not a single frame drop apart from maybe once when like a very large area was loading. Load times are extremely fast. There's no doubt in my mind that any sort of a computer can play this game without a problem. There definitely are some crashes that it can occur though. And there's, like I've mentioned a few times now, some missing translations that do affect kind of the technical aspects of the game as well. However, the developers have been continuously developing this game even still. And inside one of their own things that they mentioned, which was inside the end screen of the game, they said that they're not going to stop working on the game until they are 100% satisfied with it, which is incredible to see. This game is still almost a $30 purchase as well though, so especially if people start to pick up on this game, I imagine it's going to help to fund that developer and keep him going forward. There's a lot of DLC for the game too, mainly cosmetic that you can purchase, which will definitely help out the developer too if that's something that you're interested in. Now let's talk about replayability. Now from my perspective, this was a $5 game. The one playthrough definitely was worth the money on its own, but if you were to purchase this game off sale for the full price of like $28.99 Canadian, it's going to be a little bit of a different story. So on my first playthrough and my only playthrough so far, I was able to fully level up every single weapon to the max apart from the staff category, which does seem to be a little bit more of a gate-kept weapon category. Now, That is okay, however, just consider that once you've leveled up all these weapons, there's not really much of a purpose to go back through the story, especially considering that the story itself doesn't really offer much. There's no dialogue options, so you're not really going to be able to see a different ending. So replayability in its current state is incredibly low. There is a multiplayer aspect to it, which I didn't really mess with, so I can't speak to if there's any sort of legitimate replayability there. The developers inside the end screen did say that it does add a couple of hours to the game, so I imagine there is a decent amount going on there. I could never find an online game, though. It doesn't seem to be very popular these days. And, you know, there's not really too much for enemy progression either. You're definitely going to be seeing the same enemies kind of over and over throughout the game. Overall, replayability on this game is honestly going to be probably about a 0. But let's go ahead and do a quick rundown of the pros and cons just to summarize. For the pros, we have satisfying and a fluid combat system. There's a lot of meaningful exploration and impactful upgrades too. It's you know, visually kind of appealing, and it does have a very unique art style. And there's an automatic loot system, which definitely enhances the gameplay. It definitely makes it flow a little bit better instead of sitting there spamming E or hovering over different gear to what you want to actually, you know, see what you want to get kind of thing. As for the cons, though, it's definitely very easy to get stun locked, which definitely took away from the combat for me. I wasn't able to pull off a lot of combos or anything like that, just because there wasn't really any sort of like hyper armor that was added to them, so you get interrupted. A lot of enemies feel like hit sponges, and you're going to be seeing a lot of those same enemies throughout the game, and they seem to scale with you, so you're always going to feel like they're a hit sponge, which is a bit unfortunate. As you should know by now, there's some missing translations for some important text and story elements, and of course the tooltips being locked in the controller configuration with no way to change that definitely did irk me a little bit. Let's get to the conclusion. The conclusion on this game is that it's about a 5 to a 6 out of 10. On sale. If you're purchasing it off sale, it's probably going to be about a 3 to a 4. So I definitely would recommend to purchase it. If it's on sale, it's definitely going to be a very well spent $5. Just consider that there are going to be some technical limitations that you have to deal with, but also take it with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, this game was developed by one single person. I'm going to show a little bit of gameplay now, just while I give my closing thoughts of the final boss, as well as some of the secret areas and whatnot in the game. So if you don't want to check that out, feel free to click off now. But overall, I definitely enjoyed the game. I think you guys will as well. Wait for it to go on sale, support the developer, check out some of the DLCs as well. Most of the DLCs are just outfits with some jiggle physics, but it is what it is. They've cornered their market. I guess they know what's going on. I looked on YouTube when I was trying to debate buying this game to see if there was any other reviews or anything like that, or any sort of content on it, and I didn't really see a whole lot apart from just some copy-paste initial reviews on the game, so I decided that I would pick it up, I'd add my little flair to it and see if I liked it, and I definitely do not regret it. Thank you guys all so much for watching the video, though, and I'll see you next time.